Hello everyone, and if you are in this video right now watching this video, then you probably are going to sit for the Qualcomm internship role. So yeah, let me get started with what we will be seeing in this video. So as we all know, Qualcomm is a leading semiconductor company. It is one of the best. The Snapdragon is almost present in every phone chip you have. So this video is going to help you land an internship at Qualcomm for a hardware role. So talking about the role that you would be landing, it's very important to know what role you're sitting for. So the SoC design internship is what you're looking at if you're a hardware intern. So SoC stands for system on chip. So the system on chip design is what you would be looking to know, and you would probably want to know what to prepare to land this role. So first I will be talking about the process. Usually from my experience, I'm going to be telling you the on-campus process. Then we'll be looking at the eligibility, and then we will be looking into preparation strategies and what they would be asking in interviews and online tests. So talking about the eligibility, so the eligibility usually differs from college to college. In most places, the placement cells will negotiate with the college, with the company, and reduce the CGPA cutoff so that more people can sit for these companies. But in most cases, Qualcomm is pretty rigid. So with NITs or IITs, you will have a 7 plus CGPA cutoff. But in the case of a tier 2 colleges or in some tier 3 colleges, you might have 8 plus or 8.5 plus, depending on which college you come from. So that would be the CGPA cutoff. We are expected to obviously not have any backlogs. So the eligible streams include ECE, EEE, and E&I, which is known as instrumentation in many colleges. So E&I or ICE, as it's known in some of the NITs and IITs. So these are the streams that are eligible because it's an hardware role. For the software role, CSE can also apply, but here our focus is on the hardware role. The stipend that is offered is 45K per month, and they would be providing you accommodation and food for the internship duration. The locations are Noida, Bangalore, and Hyderabad. So depending on which team you're allotted, if your team is more on design, you might be allotted Bangalore. If your team is focused on verification, you might be moving to Noida. So the roles that are provided, like I was mentioning for the location, there's a designing role, verification role, validation role, and testing role. So these four would be explained later in my channel. But to just give you a gist, design role is basically using RTL design. You'll be working on Verilog. With verification, you will be using system Verilog and UVM, and you will be verifying the design that has been built by the designers. Validation roles usually involve timing analysis, and testing usually is like the packing of the chip and sending it to the fabrication unit. So these are different roles, and these different roles might demand different interest. Coming to the process, so the process is very straightforward and very simple. It is very similar to what happens in almost all the companies. But let me just give a disclaimer. The number of rounds may not only vary between year to year, but also between person to person. If they feel like they need an extra interview to hire you, please do not come to me and say, hey, they had an extra interview for me, but you just mentioned one interview. So it's very ambiguous, the process. It really depends on the hiring manager. But however, I am sure that these three aspects will be present in almost all the processes. So first one is the online test. The online test will be for a hour and a half. It might have three sections. If you are applying for the hardware role, there will be an analog section, digital section, an aptitude section, or a C++ section. So I would advise you to be prepared on aptitude as well, because sometimes they might ask aptitude questions over analog or C++ rounds. So more on this in the next slide. So I'll be talking about what topics were covered in the online test. Coming to the tech interview, so again, more on it in the next slide, but your tech interview might last for an hour. Sometimes there might be two interviews for tech. They might have an exclusive interview just to talk about your projects, or if you are a very project oriented person, they might have an exclusive interview for half an hour to talk about your projects or internships. The final one, if you've passed both the rounds, is the HR interview. So, mind you, they will be filtering a lot of people in these rounds. Finally, if you go to the HR interview, it's probably just a formality. They'll ask you. With respect to the online test, we would be encountering, like I said, three divisions: digital, analog, and a bit of C++. So, with respect to the digital, the main focus for the test that I wrote was on finite systems. Finite state machines. So, FSM is a very important topic. You would be given both directional and non-directional FSM, and which are milli and more circuits, and you would be asked to, you know, predict the future output, or how many flip-flops would be needed to implement the FSM. Next is basic digital logic. You're expected to know digital electronics to quite a very good extent. Then we'll be moving on to hazards and faults. So you would be asked a lot of questions on what type of faults they are, what type of hazards they are, and how you can eliminate them. Uh, all of these are multiple choice questions, so it shouldn't be that difficult. Then you might have quite a few problems on static timing analysis, STA, and a few multiple choice questions on Verilog as well. So coming to analog, your main focus would be on networks. There will be a lot of networks, linear systems, where there might be reciprocative systems and non-reciprocative systems. So that is one of the main focuses of the online MCQ test. The next one is linear integrated circuits. A lot of op-amp questions were asked. A lot of different varieties of op-amp questions, Schmidt trigger, and a lot of application-based questions were also asked. The next one was the BJT and FET circuits. Again, it's very important to know the characteristics. So a lot of graph-based questions were also asked in the analog section. So just make sure that you are really good with biasing and the FET BJT circuits. So the online test, apart from these two sections, had a C++ coding section. So the coding section also had only MCQs. So the coding section involved MCQs from simple topics such as function overloading, paraphrasing, simple loops, while loops, for loops, do while loops, and just simple complexity questions, complexity of a problem, of a code, and other small questions based on functions and function overloading. The final one was the interview, the technical interview. I think the technical interview was quite difficult because it went for an hour, and in the online test, if you don't know something, it doesn't really matter how you react to the question, but during the interview, the interviewer can see you, and that can be a very big disadvantage or an advantage, as they can see how confident you are. So coming to digital, the main focus of the digital interview was, so I was given a choice. So I chose digital because I was more comfortable with digital during the interview. So the questions were mainly based on, again, digital puzzles. So puzzles such as what number, when I 2's complement it, gives another number, which is the 3's complement of another number. So they try to give a lot of puzzles and think how you approach the problem. So that was very thought provocative and also enjoyable. The first a few minutes was very enjoyable. Again, next one was hazards. The hazards were not that easy because I was personally quite I found faults and hazards quite difficult. So the hazards were a bit tough to handle. So the stuck at 1, stuck at 0 faults, and how to solve them were one of the few questions that I was able to answer. The next one was the STA problems. So the MCQ had a lot of numericals from static timing analysis, but the interview had more of a application based question. So we had questions like, if one part of one flip flop of the system is in one part of the chip and the second one is far away, what are the phenomena that you can experience? And as you answer, hold violation, setup violation, they tend to build up on the question and ask you how you can solve it, what problems you will encounter when you solve it, and so on and so forth. So that was quite difficult. And finally, in the digital section, it ended with Verilog coding, which led to basic questions on analog. So the BJT FET questions were very simple. They were not that difficult. Feedback amplifiers, again, we just had to design some feedback amplifiers and just bias them. That was not that difficult. Again, it really depends on how you've prepared. So the analog was very basic. I'm really sorry if you chose analog as your main choice, because my interview gives a digital perspective to the whole process. So just make sure you're very confident during the interview. And coming to the HR, so the HR round, again, it was just a formality, like I said. They ask you the location, the team, and what type of teams you would wish to be a part of. So that was that. And this kind of concludes all the information